This is Right On Radio, the voice of the vast right-wing conspiracy.
Welcome to Right On Radio. My name is Daniel Friberg. I'm the editor of righton.net and the CEO of Arctus Media. I will be your host tonight, together with my co-host, friend and colleague, John Morgan, who is Arctus editor-in-chief, as well as co-editor at righton.net. As this is our first program, I'll begin by offering a brief explanation of what we want to do. Right On Radio aims to be a weekly, one-hour podcast with at least one special guest per week. For our Swedish listeners who used to listen to our previous Swedish language podcast at Multiple, I can assure you our aim is to make this one more professional, more entertaining, less boring, and less autistic, and better in every possible way. Anyway, the topic of today's program is the American presidential election. And for that purpose, joining us tonight, we have Matt Forney, American author and political commentator, who's done a lot of on-the-ground live reporting from the Iowa caucus for several sites, including primarily righton.net. And I highly recommend you all to read those articles. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Joining us tonight as well, we have Swedish journalist and political analyst Baron Jonas de Geer, who has for well over a decade now been a famous profile within the Swedish Alternative Right. Glad to have you here, Jonas.
Well, thank you for having me, Daniel.
And I'm here also.
Oh, yeah. But I already met you, John, so that's kind of super.
Okay, I'm just saying hello to our audience.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello, John.
He's here. He exists.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's get this started. So, Matt, I mean, you obviously are the one with the most insight. I mean, you've been to all these campaign meetings. You visited pretty much every candidate's meeting in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And you've also written very entertaining and very, very, very thoughtful and interesting articles about pretty much almost every candidate. What is your general impression of the whole thing that went on in Iowa?
My deep suspicions are that the GOP establishment and Microsoft, I don't have hard evidence of this, but I believe that the vote was in fact rigged to attempt to create a fake sort of a momentum for Marco Rubio. I'll give a quick overview. Donald Trump has been leading in the Republican presidential nomination for quite some time because Americans have just had it with Wall Street controlled globalist politicians. Trump has been advocating a openly nationalist platform. He wants to fight illegal immigration by building a border wall with Mexico, and he also wants to renegotiate free trade deals that he feels are disadvantageous to American workers. But he is largely despised by many official conservatives and many official members of the Republican Party because, they claim he's not a true conservative or whatever, or that he's a loose cannon. But in actuality, he's not owned by the Wall Street cabal, and they've been searching for any possible way they can to sort of knock him out of the race. In the polls leading up to the Iowa caucuses last month, Trump was had a narrow lead in most of them for the past couple of weeks anyway. And my evidence attending campaign events in each, I attended a campaign events for every Republican candidate with the exception of John Kasich, and that's only because he only made I think maybe one or two appearances in Iowa when I was there. Trump by far was drawing the biggest crowds. Consistently at I went to a rally in Pella, Iowa, which is about an hour southeast of Des Moines, the state capital. It's city of about 10,000 people. Trump draws about 3,000 people to this events to the point where 2/3 are denied entry because of the auditorium is too small. Trump draws an overflow crowd in Iowa City. No other candidate is drawing even a tenth of the support that Trump has. The closest that comes to on either side is Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. Yet in the final vote count, Trump draws. He comes in second place, but he draws barely more votes than Marco Rubio, who was getting maybe about 100 people, 50 people each at his events, and was not inspiring anyone at all. So my suspicion is that there was some foul play there, but to a certain extent, it really hasn't helped the GOP much because Trump went on to a huge landslide win in New Hampshire, and from what it looks like, he may be headed towards one in South Carolina as well, as evidenced by the fact that the other candidates are trying to pull off dirty tricks against him. That's my assessment of the Republican side. On the Democratic side,
sorry, Matt, but don't you think? Sorry to interrupt, but don't you think that sort of that argument has been a bit sort of overrated? That Trump is economically independent, because I mean that goes for I mean the last 2 or 3 Republican nominees as well. I mean, the Bushes or Mitt Romney were filthy rich as well. So I mean, they weren't in sort of the pockets of the Wall Street people as such.
Well, the thing is, all of those candidates were reliant on outside funding and spending. Trump is the only candidate, and candidate of consequence, who is funding his campaign, self-funding it, and funding it through individual contributions. He's made a point of this repeatedly. That's the central issue. Virtually all because of the sheer amount of expense in running a political campaign, someone who isn't incredibly rich has to rely on these.
Yeah, but the other ones, like I said, the Romneys and the Bushes were incredibly rich as well. So it's sort of Trump's gimmick politically. That's my take on it, anyhow.
It's something of a gimmick, but at the same time, it's something that does provide a noticeable difference between him and the other GOP candidates, who are very reliant on what are now called super PACs. Basically, after the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, corporate spending on political campaigns have been completely eliminated. So, like for example, in Jeb Bush's case, he's been spending huge amounts of money on advertising and on attack ads and on campaigning through his super PAC Right to Rise. The candidates, even if these candidates have their own personal wealth, they've opted to tap into the super PAC machine just in hopes of burying their opponents in advertising. Trump has not done this. The only candidates on either side who aren't reliant on this outside funding are Trump and Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. Though Sanders is funding his campaign through individual contributions, he doesn't have the wealth that Trump has, obviously.
So I think that's very interesting, and it should also be said that both Jonas and John are big supporters of Bernie Sanders. I'm not, of course. I'm all.
I wouldn't say I'm a big supporter of his, but
a small supporter.
I think he's interesting. Well, I also think Trump is good. So
you like them both equally.
We can get into that later. But Matt, I actually had a quick question for you about Iowa. Some of the interpretations of the outcome that I read attributed Ted Cruz's victory, if we assumed it was actually legitimate, to the fact that he was pushing the religion, the Bible angle very hard, and some of the articles I read said that appealed more to the evangelicals in Iowa than Trump's more secular message did. Do you think there's any truth to that, or do you think that's just?
I think that's pretty accurate. I should clarify. I don't think there was any vote fraud on Ted Cruz's behalf. Cruz was leading in the polls for most of the month prior to the Iowa caucuses. It wasn't until about the week before that he started to fall behind Trump. And basically, I mean, this is going to sound a bit insulting, but Midwesterners are kind of naive. I mean, I live in Chicago. I chose to move to the Midwest from where I grew up in New York because I have the people here. There's a social trust here, a sense of community that's really absent in other parts of the country, and it's something I enjoy. But the downside of it is that Midwesterners get a bit too trusting of outsiders, and Ted Cruz's campaign was predicated on in Iowa was predicated on playing up this naivete to his advantage. He depicts himself as a incredibly pious evangelical Christian leader, as opposed to Trump, who is this his New York values of strip clubs and casinos and abortion and whatnot. And I can see that argument winning over a lot of Iowans who are suspicious of conservative Iowans who are suspicious of the values of the East Coast. So that's I believe that Ted Cruz's victory was more or less legitimate. I mean, excluding the dirty trick he pulled in which he claimed that Carson was dropping out, Ben Carson was dropping out to get his votes. But aside from that, I think Cruz's win in Iowa was legitimate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I especially like the fact that they tried to blame the whole thing on CNN afterwards, and CNN reciprocated by publishing an article proving that Ted Cruz was lying. I mean, CNN had not written anything of the sort that Cruz suggested. For example, implicating or implying that Carson was pulling out in any way. So it was entertaining, and I think this together with everything else that has happened afterwards is showing that Ted Cruz is certainly one of the slimiest candidates, as you also wrote in your very nice brief overview of all the candidates, which was published on Right On recently. Matt?
Yes, Ted Cruz's whole thing is well, he's a familiar character for anyone who's familiar with Texas politics. Texans love to talk a big game about how tough they are and how patriotic they are. But for the last 50 years actually, every Texas politician on the national stage has ended up selling out the country in some form or another for riches and glory. It was Lyndon Johnson, a president in the 60s, a Texan, a Democrat, who signed the 1965 Immigration Act that has resulted in white Americans being demographically displaced from their own country through massive non-white immigration. And we've also seen George W. Bush, another Texan, tanked the economy. He created a housing crash during his presidency, housing collapse, because he was effectively trying to bribe Latinos into voting for him through low-interest mortgages, which when you hand out a bunch of mortgages to people who don't have the capability to pay them back, eventually your tab is going to be called, and that resulted in the housing crisis. Texas politicians have been, like for example, Rick Perry was against building a border wall, claiming that despite if you build a 50-foot wall, then someone will build a 51-foot ladder, despite the fact that, for example, Israel, which many Republican politicians make a point of reaffirming their support for, Israel has had massive success with its border wall and keeping out illegal aliens from Africa. So what you have is a lot of Texas politicians who are explicitly anti-nationalists, despite, including the Republicans, anti-nationalists, and are just out for personal gain. And Ted Cruz is very much cut from that cloth. He tells the Iowans that he's a pious, God-fearing man, and that he complains about Donald Trump's quote-unquote New York values. Well, Ted Cruz, his wife, is working for Goldman Sachs, a major New York investment bank, and he's taking money from Goldman Sachs, and he's failing to report it on his campaign finance form. So the man is he's very much typical of the sort of politician that comes out of Texas, just an all-around sleazebag, and he's someone who would absolutely get slaughtered in a general election, which is part of the reason why he's not going to go very far, particularly with Trump remaining in the race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I share that sentiment completely, and the sooner he drops out, the better, of course. If he will, let's see. But yeah, I have a pretty high hopes for Trump's success, and I think the results from South Carolina will kind of be a defining moment in this campaign. I mean, if Trump wins big in South Carolina, people will simply have to accept that he will very likely be the nominee.
Yeah.
Well, I would wait until after Super Tuesday before I start saying that, but it will certainly be good if he manages to pull that off. Of course, South Carolina would be good for Trump and for Sanders if he can beat Hillary again. But I mean, look back at the primaries from 2008, when it was Hillary versus Obama. I mean, we didn't really know who the nominee was going to be until June of that year. So, we could end up in another situation like that this time, but it's too early to say.
Is there any other sort of Republican hopeful that would stand a chance against Trump, do you reckon? You guys being American and all.
I really think at this stage, the closest that Trump could get to a competitor was Marco Rubio, because, in fact, that was my contention, was that the GOP establishment was trying to set Rubio up as the anti-Trump following the Iowa caucuses. But the problem is, then in the New Hampshire debate, he embarrassed himself with his debate club. He collapsed to 5th in the actual vote. In South Carolina, he's doing better, but he and Cruz are slugging it out for 2nd place. He's probably the closest you could get to an anti-Trump candidate, because he's pliable. He'll basically do whatever he's told. He's an empty suit, but he's also telegenic and he has some charisma, But if the GOP can't gin up support for him, which they're having difficulty doing after what happened in New Hampshire, then that's pretty much it. There's always the possibility they could pull shenanigans at the actual convention, but in the actual vote, where it looks like Trump is way out ahead of everyone else.
I think the most interesting thing will be to see what happens when more candidates start dropping out. For example, Jeb. I mean, he should have dropped out long ago. I have no idea why he's still persists and sticking around. I mean, he's without any chance whatsoever. And the establishment candidates' votes start to consolidate for one candidate. For example, Marco Rubio, which seems to be the most likely establishment candidate. That might make things a little bit more interesting. Although I think it will still be very, very difficult for this person to compete against Trump, especially in debates. I mean, Trump is pretty much in a league of his own when it comes to the debates, and he is much more charismatic than any other candidate and so forth. So, yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about this.
Yeah, I personally don't see. It's difficult to imagine any one of these candidates getting enough support to overcome Trump, because the big thing with in the contrast, you can see this with the debates. That's why they're so popular. Trump, for better or for worse, says what's on his mind. He doesn't hold back. Whereas you can tell with Rubio, Cruz, and the other candidates that they're carefully rehearsed talking points. It's and to a certain extent, I think, and a lot of this is driving Bernie Sanders support on the Democratic side. Many of Trump's supporters may not be 100% on with his board with his plan, but they want a politician who isn't condescending to them and isn't focus testing his political platform and his speeches to appeal to the widest number of people. You know, there's a lot of that on the Bernie Sanders side as well. You know, it's like a lot of Sanders supporters probably aren't 100% down with his economic program, but they want a candidate who is not a stooge, someone who is authentic, you know. And Sanders,
that's an interesting point, actually. I mean, sorry to interfere, but I live in the UK since 10 years, even though I'm Swedish. But you do have as Labour leader here, Jeremy Corbyn, who is definitely a socialist. He's the Bernie Sanders of the UK, if you will. And it seems like that kind of authenticity is coming back into fashion, if you see what I'm saying. Yeah,
it's kind of surprising from. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, people, I mean, well, speaking as an American, I just think people are finally tired of, you know, the same old cliches from, you know, it's happened in both parties in my lifetime before. I mean, not that it doesn't equal what Trump has been achieving, but I mean, I still remember back in 2000 when, you know, there was all this talk about Ralph Nader and, you know, we've had outsider candidates before, you know, Ron Paul on the right side, but this is the first time where it seems like both parties are in that situation simultaneously, and neither Democrats or Republicans are satisfied with business as usual. I mean, there's obviously a real hunger for something
absolutely.
different.
And you know, I mean, Ralph Nader is someone that I could respect, even though I didn't sort of agree with him. But definitely, because he was genuine at the end of the day, and I think most lefties could apart from the Jews, from, you know, for other reasons, they could respect Pat Buchanan because he was who he was, and etc. Yeah.
Yeah, and to return to what John just said, I totally agree. I mean, it's not a coincidence that this presidential election is the most exciting one yet, because now we have two really strong anti-establishment candidates on each side. We have Trump and we have Bernie Sanders, which I know that at least John and Jonas like a lot. But let's get back to that, and let's talk more about...
We're not supporters of his, I don't think.
No,
neither John nor me.
Well. Let's talk more about that after a short break to listen to some beautiful music by Winglord, because I think it's time to go to break now. And we'll listen to "The World Is Changing" by the Arctos house band Winglord.
Ready, the world is changing. world is changing.
Let's return to the topic of Bernie Sanders. Jonas and John, feel free to speak your mind.
Well, Sanders, I mean, I think I would be happy if either Trump or Sanders actually became the next president, because they're very interesting in their own way. I mean, obviously, in some ways, Trump's positions are closer to my own when it comes to immigration and restricting American military intervention abroad and so forth. I mean, he's said a lot of things in relation to that I agree with. Although at the same time, I mean, he's never held any political office. He has no record. We don't really know what he'll do, if he's actually elected. If he continues to stand by the things that he is now, it would be very good, but that's less certain. If Sanders actually managed to win, I mean, obviously, there's aspects of his program that I don't agree with at all, like, when it comes to race and so forth. But, I think he would do, as everyone here has been saying, he seems like an authentic candidate. He says what he really feels and believes. And I think he would put some limits on globalization and on multinational capitalism, which is very destructive and supportive of immigration as well. And also, I think he would also, like Trump, probably curb America's military interventions abroad. So both of them, I think, have problems, but I think both of them are, in some ways very positive. So I really think, either one, if it came down to a contest between the two of them, I don't know, I'd probably lean more towards Trump, but I would be happy with either of them, for speaking honestly.
Sorry, Jonas. Before you go and hold your defense speech of Bernie Sanders, let me just get back to John there. I'm very happy to hear that you don't agree with everything in his program, but I'm a little bit disturbed that you view him as a positive candidate at all, because he is basically a communist and he is ineligible, basically. I would certainly hope that he would be the Democratic candidate, because Trump would sweep the floor with him easily. Which
I don't think he's a communist, though. I'll just mention that. He's a socialist, but I wouldn't call it. That's different from communism.
Well, yeah, potato. But still, I mean, he says that he wants to remodel the U.S. after the Swedish kind of model of society, and that is, I mean, anyone who believes that is a good idea is like purely evil in my view.
No, I wouldn't want the U.S. to end up like.
He's not a communist, though, for saying that. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of socialists around the world have got sort of a romantic notion of a sort of Swedish social democracy. So that's not in itself too extreme, I don't think.
He wouldn't be able to achieve it anyway. I mean, if either Trump or Sanders becomes president, I mean, it's not a dictatorial position. They're still going to have to work with the Congress and the Senate, and it's not like they're going to just be able to ram through, a complete, remodeling of the entire U.S. That would never happen. I mean, at best they'll be able to achieve, some changes, but they're still going to be restricted by the fact that they're operating in a system that's moving in a particular direction and is riddled with special interests. Of course, I wouldn't want the U.S. to become like Sweden is today, but at the same time, I just think that Sanders probably would put some limits on capitalism, which are needed in the U.S. I mean, it's really out of control there, which is why I've said, I mean, you said before, Daniel, that, it's bad when we couldn't agree with somebody who's a socialist, but I've argued before in other speeches that I've given that I don't think the right-left dichotomy really means anything today. I think the meaningful dichotomy is between liberal and anti-liberal. And there certainly are some leftists who are anti-liberal.
Couldn't agree with you more, John.
I agree with that as well. Of course, the most important dichotomy is between liberal and anti-liberal, but that is pretty much the same as left versus right. I mean, if you're talking about the true right and the Western left, I mean, the Western left is completely liberal. They're liberal leftists.
Yeah, this is true.
So I don't see a contradiction there really, and I prefer the left-right dichotomy because it makes it easier for people to understand what we're
Makes
talking
sense, yeah.
Well, from a classical perspective, though, I mean, there is no real right in Western Europe or the U.S. today. It's just two branches of the left.
about. No,
Two liberal.
True indeed. Yeah.
but it's changing. I mean, it's changing right now. We can see the rise of a true right, to use Evolos' term, both in Europe and in the U.S. I mean, Trump is certainly not without his flaws, but I mean, if you look at what he says and what he said during the debates and his platform, I would say he's more alt-right than old-right, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like I said, if he stands by the things he's saying now, he'd be great.
Which I believe he will do. But over to you, Matt. What do you think about all of this? And what do you think about Bernie Sanders? I'm very curious to hear that.
My estimation of Bernie Sanders is that his thing is that his success is that he's tapping into the same wellspring of discontent that Trump is also, though he's coming at it from a different angle. Trump's coming at it from a nationalist angle. Bernie Sanders is coming at it from a democratic socialist angle. And his big thing is that he's actually, and I credit Sanders for this, he's actually addressing real economic issues in his platform. The difference between his speeches and Hillary Clinton's speeches are like night and day. Hillary focuses almost exclusively on social wedge issues. Like she talks about gay rights. She's taking up the cause of transgender rights. And weirdly enough, she's taking up the cause of HIV prevention, which I guess is in some people's minds is progressive, which when actuality to me sounds like a throwback from the 80s. But, whereas Sanders actually talks about the economic devastation brought on young people by the student loan crisis and the jobs market.
I liked your article about that at Right On, Matt. I thought that was good.
Yeah. So I have a good deal of sympathy for Sanders and for his supporters because the college students legitimately have been screwed over by the system. It's I have to every month when I see my student loans being taken out of my bank account, I cringe a little. So I can see why a lot of people would get behind Sanders. I would rather have him as president of Hillary, though. To be perfectly honest, that's like saying I'd rather be shot in the head than have my throat slit. But I would rather have him as president. I don't think I could bring myself to vote for him, though, even though despite my sympathy, because I'm not a fan of the Democratic Socialist program. But number two, and this really hasn't been discussed a whole lot, Sanders is in many ways a weak man, and I don't mean that. I guess it is kind of an insult, but Sanders has been forced to sort of. Like for example, the instance a few months ago where a Black Lives Matter activist stormed the stage at one of his speeches and took his microphone from him, and he just sort of sat there dumbly. And then the next day, he started rewriting his program to sort of appease them. Sanders is not he's a sincere man. I don't believe he's a psychopath. I believe he's a sincere man. He's an authentic man, but he doesn't have the force of will necessary to enact large parts of his program. Trump, to his credit, he's based his entire career on his ability to make deals with people. I mean, he wrote a book about it, and you don't succeed in the world of real estate and property development without the ability to negotiate and get your way. So I think even if Sanders becomes president, a large part of he's going to have difficulty getting his program through because he doesn't have the force of will that say Trump has, or even some of the weaker candidates have. I would infinitely prefer him as president to Hillary or actually to a large part of the Republican field, but I don't think I could bring myself to vote for him just solely based on that.
No, but I think he's at the end of the day he's predictable. And what we've seen with American presidents of the last 2 decades is that they're unpredictable, and that's dangerous.
Yeah,
And I don't think he's a dangerous man at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I'm more familiar with Bernie Sanders than most because when I was going to college, I went up to college near Vermont when he was first elected to the Senate. To his credit, he's been consistently in favor of economic social democracy for his entire career, and he actually did a fairly good job as mayor of Burlington back in the 80s. He helped revitalize what was a city that was basically on the verge of collapse. So he has that going for him. I just don't think he's I just think he needs to be a bit more forceful, and I'm not a huge fan of I'm not a huge fan of the social democracy program. We need some common sense restrictions on Wall Street, obviously, but I think Sanders goes too far in the opposite direction.
Yeah, but possibly, but I don't think not being an American, I don't think that he'd pursue the kind of idiotic policy in the Middle East that Bush did, for example.
Yes.
Or that he'd do the same mistakes as Clinton, who was completely sort of unaware of the world outside of the U.S., basically, to be honest.
Definitely, Bernie Sanders would be a big advantage on the foreign policy front, if only because he wouldn't be sticking his proboscis in areas where he didn't have to.
No, there you go. Yeah.
But still, he would be soft on the immigration issue. He would never build a wall. He would. I don't know his position on amnesty, but I would guess that it wouldn't be completely unlikely that he would support the notion of giving amnesty to all the illegals in the U.S. right now, and that would be a very bad thing, of course.
He sort of waffled on the amnesty issue throughout much of his Senate career. For example, back in 2007, I believe he voted against the amnesty package that President Bush tried to ram through that year, but in later votes, he sort of came down on the amnesty side. To a certain extent, he's acknowledged in interviews and whatnot that he recognizes that immigration has a deleterious effect on the wages of the American worker. Whether or not he'll actually, follow that to its logical conclusion sort of remains to be seen.
But anyways, I mean, he is probably ineligible. I mean, I would guess that he has a very slim chance of becoming the next president of the U.S., especially if Trump becomes the Republican nominee, which I truly believe he will be, unless someone kills him first. That's pretty much the only way to stop him, or by doing some really shady back dealings. But well, if it wins too big, I think even that would be very, very difficult for the Republican establishment. But still, of course, he's better than Hillary Clinton. But I mean, everyone is better than Hillary Clinton. She is like pure evil, corrupt witch. So I don't think there's any contest there. I think everyone is in total agreement that Sanders is better than Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, no, I think, to be honest, Daniel, I think if it's not going to be Hillary, it's probably going to be Sanders rather than Trump. That's my sort of analysis of the thing.
Oh, so you really think that Sanders stand a chance in a national presidential election against Trump?
Yeah, I certainly do. And
why? I mean, Trump would slaughter him in every single debate, especially considering socialist background, which is very controversial in the U.S.
Let's let sort of our American friends talk about it, because they know the situation better. But I would have thought that most people don't listen to debates. They don't follow that. They sort of
well, in that case, that would help Trump.
They certainly do when Trump participates, because that is like pure entertainment. I mean, I'd rather watch a Republican debate with Trump than Lord of the Rings or any movie, because it has a higher entertainment value.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you would, but probably the homies in Detroit wouldn't. So I mean,
they don't vote anyway because most of them are convicted felons. But That's actually not really a joke, but and the rest aren't registered, so.
So Matt, what's your take on this? Do you think if it came down to Sanders versus Trump, do you think Sanders would win?
I would put my money on Trump, but I'd also say that Sanders has a better chance of beating Trump than Hillary does, simply because Sanders supporters are very passionate and they actually like their candidate. The atmosphere I went to the Bernie Sanders rally in Iowa at the Iowa State and Ames. The supporters there actually happen to care about him personally, and they're fired up. And I actually think a lot of if Sanders doesn't get the nomination, a good portion of his supporters would actually cross over to support Trump and vice versa. Whereas Hillary, the only real reason people are supporting Hillary is because, number one, you've got people who are nostalgic for the Bill Clinton years, and number two, people aren't supporting her because they like her. They support her because they think she's the most electable candidate. Like, there are a few people who genuinely love Hillary, and her accumulated baggage, the email scandal, everything that she's been involved with, everything that Bill Clinton has been involved with, is coming back to bite her. I mean, much in the same way, the Democrats tried to stack their primary to ensure that Hillary got the nomination, and she's basically barely treading water. She won the Iowa caucuses by just the slimmest of margins, and she saw a landslide loss in New Hampshire. So I do believe that. I believe that Trump has the edge in a Trump versus Sanders win, but Sanders actually has a fighting chance, where if it's Trump versus Hillary, no contest, Trump is going to completely run right over her.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement there. I mean, and I would certainly love to see a presidential race between Trump and Hillary, because that would provide the most entertainment value. I mean, he would totally destroy her. I mean, considering all the baggage and so forth, the lesbian lovers and Bill Clinton's sexual scandals, and was it even some rape or something? Or well,
there's also the fact that she's really not in good health. I was at both with rally of hers, and I was also at her Iowa victory party. She has all the obvious tells of someone who is in an advanced state of mental decay. Like, for example, and I got this on camera, at the rally where she's being introduced by this guy, Chad Griffin, the head of the Human Rights Campaign. She's on stage as well, and while he's speaking, she's just sort of nodding off in this sort of senile dementia nursing home fashion, like she's trying to struggle while she's even there. Then when she actually gives a speech, it's so blatantly rehearsed and pre-scripted that you can just visualize that she has to go through a ton of off-screen prep just to be able to capable of speaking publicly. Considering the rumors that she actually had a stroke 4 years ago when she was Secretary of State, it's not. I don't think. Just on a medical level, she's really not fit to be president, or for that matter, for any public office.
Yeah, and I've heard all about that as well, and it makes me very happy. But still, I would still hope that she wins the Democratic nomination, because it would provide an easier win for Trump and a more entertaining final race for the presidency.
But are you certain, Daniel, that the Trump will actually be the GOP nominee?
Of course, I can never be 100% certain, but it certainly looks like it will be that way now. As I said before, I mean, the only way he can be stopped is if someone kills him, or if they do some really shady background dealings, which is probably only possible if the runner-up is at least fairly close to him in terms of votes. And I don't really see that happening, considering the numbers in the national polls, and which keep rising and rising for in Trump's favor. I mean, the latest national poll, he had like 44%, and the second place candidate, Ted Cruz, had like 17 or something. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt. But I think.
Well, I sort of dispute the importance of national polls, because there's never going to be a national primary election. What you have to pay attention to are individual state-by-state polls. Mm-hmm. In South Carolina, Trump has a pretty wide lead over all of his competitors. He's at, I think, 35%. Next closest is Cruz at like 12-14%. Unlikely that they're going to be able to close the gap in the next week, since the primary is this Saturday. And Trump is also posting up very large leads in many of the Super Tuesday states, such as Ohio and Virginia and whatnot. So I think a lot of the GOP brass are starting to realize that if they do try to steal the nomination from Trump, if he wins it fair and square, then the party's going to collapse, because the people that Trump is bringing into the party to support Republican candidates, they're either going to not vote, or they're going to vote for Democrats out of spite. Like, I've already stated that if Trump is not the nominee, if he has the nomination stolen from him, I'm not going to vote in November. He got me to register to vote for the first time in nearly 6 years. So I think a lot of the GOP brass are going to realize that if they're going to have to get aboard the Trump train, or there won't be a party left to defend.
No, I'm in total agreement, and this might well prove to be the final presidential election where Republicans actually stand a chance of winning. And I mean, if they don't elect Trump as the nominee, they might as well just shut down the old party, because they will never win again.
Well, they'll reinvent it as, they'll find a black woman, or black lesbian woman or something to run next time. And,
in a wheelchair with some transgender black woman in a wheelchair or something. So we'll basically have two ultra-leftist parties to choose between in the US. But this is pretty much because of the demographical development in the US. This is pretty much the last chance for the Republicans to win, I think.
Yeah.
But of course, I'm an outsider. I'm a Swedish person. I'm sure both of you Americans on this pod are much more much more insight and knowledge about this. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, of course they would. But could you please enlighten us non-Americans? When did the GOP become sort of the obvious choice of the right in a generic sense, then, if you will? Because that's not always been the case, has it? Yeah.
Well, if you go back to the 19th century, but of course, what the Republican and Democratic parties represent has changed a lot over the last 100 years, but they've been, the two antagonists all along. What's interesting is that, of course, a century ago, the South was largely Democratic, but the Democratic Party stood for very different things back then than it does now. Now, of course, the South is overwhelmingly voting Republican, because the Republicans have adopted a lot of the issues that. But that's what I was just about to say in response to Daniel, is that the parties, the Republican-Democrat dichotomy is so ingrained in the American psyche. I really don't think that will change. If one of the parties really implodes like that, they just go and reinvent themselves, and then 4 years later they come back and they're,
this is basically my question. I mean, since when, really? Because I know there were sort of socially conservative Democratic politicians as late as the early 90s. So when did that sort of become the norm?
It's been a sort of slow process over the past 50 years, but I'd say the final solidifying thing that made the Republicans the de facto right party and the Democrats the de facto left party was in 2010, which was when we saw basically the last vestiges of the conservative Southern Democrats and conservative Midwestern Democrats just wiped out. In large part of it is driven by demography. We've seen that under Obama, the Democrats have increasingly catered to blacks, to Latinos, to gays, to other minorities, and this has sort of forced the Republican Party to becoming the party of white America by default. I mean, this has been a slow process. If I recall correctly, Republicans have won the majority of the white vote in every election going back to, I think, Reagan. Yet the increasing number of non-whites in this country, mainly driven by immigration, illegal and otherwise, have basically allowed the Democrats to overwhelm the Republicans in many places just by sheer votes and numbers, because minorities vote for 90% of blacks vote Democratic. 75% of Latinos vote Democratic. It's basically a de facto, and I've written about this in my write-on dispatches. The Republicans more or less have to. Politics in this country is not driven by ideology so much as it is driven by demographics. And in order for the GOP to survive, it has to become the de facto party of white America, because the Democrats have become the de facto party of non-white America.
Yeah, no, and this is kind of what I'm getting at. It's become racialized, really, hasn't it? I mean, because up until the 90s, what was his name? Casey, I think the senator who wasn't allowed to speak at Clinton's whatever. Yeah. Because he was against abortion and etc. He was a socially conservative Irish American. And, since then, the Democratic Party has become more and more, the party of the minorities. And seriously, the homosexuals and the transsexuals and whatever, I mean, they don't make up any significant percentage of the population.
No, but the people who sympathize with them makes up a large segment of the population.
They do. Yeah.
And this shift has actually driven. This shift is part of what gives the Republicans has given them their support, the support they've had during the Obama administration. Because back in 2008, it was assumed that the Democrats would be in power for at least a generation, that the Republicans had sort of isolated themselves to the South. But all those calculations were based on the Democrats retaining their existing level of white support, which they have not. Like here where I live, the upper Midwest, used to be a very heavily Democratic area. States like Iowa, actually Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, were very heavily Democratic. What's happening is that these states have, almost all these states have, with the exception of Minnesota, now have Republican governors. Republicans control the state legislatures. They control the majority of the congressional delegations. Even here in Illinois, which is very, very Democratic, largely due to the corruption of Chicago, we have a Republican governor who has been who won on an openly conservative platform of reducing taxation and fighting corruption in the state governments. So we've seen this shift has mainly been caused by Obama himself, who has been trying to play up the race war angle, such as with Ferguson, the Trayvon Martin incident, and a lot of more working class whites have seen this and have either dropped out of voting entirely, or in the case of they're moving over to the Republican side. And Trump is actually drawing a lot of these supporters. He's bringing in former white Democrats and independents who may have been bullish on the Republicans before, but they see that the Democrats are openly hostile to their interests, so they're going to the one candidate who looks like he actually might defend their interests.
Mm-hmm. Which is what I don't like about him, to be honest. I mean, he's there's another connotation to populist in sort of European circumstances than there is in American, and I think he's a populist in sort of the bad sense of the word. So I've got an uncanny kind of feeling about that guy.
What do these bad feelings stem from? I mean, so far everything I've seen from him in debates, in his TV ads, everything is pretty solid, and like 90% at least in accordance with alt-right positions. So I'm very curious about
call it intuition, Daniel.
Yeah, that's an easy way to answer.
No, but I mean seriously, no. I think he's got sort of a smart aleck kind of quality to him. I can't understand why him, having been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, hasn't done anything before he's 70 years old.
Well, that one is easy. That one is easy because I mean, at the age he is, at his current age, he doesn't really have much to lose anymore, so he can kind of go all in.
But he didn't. 40 years ago, 30. Yeah, I mean, look.
He had lots of businesses to protect. I mean, it's the same in Sweden. I mean, in Sweden, most people kind of get into politics at a point where they don't really have much to risk anymore, when their career is kind of coming to an end and so forth. And I can see the same pattern here. So I believe it's honest.
I'm just saying I don't trust that guy. I'm sorry. I know you do, and
yeah, I do 100%.
You want to believe in him, but I don't. It's, and we've talked about this before in Swedish.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun, and I won that debate very easily.
No, you said you did not.
But what do you say, Matt? Do you trust Donald Trump?
Well, I it's like I can see the potential of demagoguery with Trump, but the problem is that we've seen politicians from both sides of both parties progressively move America towards totalitarianism. Like, we have I have the fundamental absurdity of someone like Glenn Beck calling Trump a dangerous psychopath, when people like Beck backed Bush with the Patriot Act and other restrictions of civil liberties, and going to Obama with warrantless drone killings and the like. So really, a lot of the mainstream commentators who are accusing Trump of being a fascist really don't have a leg to stand on, because they've been backing candidates from both parties who've been doing the exact same thing. So realistically, to be perfectly honest, on that front, I can't see I can't see Trump being worse than the alternative. Like, if any of the other Republican candidates get in, or if Hillary gets in, they're going to continue the same accumulation of power we're seeing in the executive branch that we've seen under Bush and Obama.
Yeah, I would agree. And what I would add too is that the very fact of Trump even just getting the nomination, letting alone becoming president, will completely destroy the Republican establishment, and that in itself is something that's been needed for a long time. And I would hope that even if Trump doesn't pan out as, the right-wing messiah that some people are making him out to be, that it will at least open the door for perhaps a genuine conservative or somebody from the genuine right to perhaps rise up in his wake. I don't see any way it could be bad.
But this is it, guys. I mean, doesn't it come down to, at the end of the day, that sort of American politics has to be sort of reshaped fundamentally?
Absolutely.
You have to get out of the sort of the two-party system, and it doesn't just go for America. It goes for most Western countries, but certainly in America's case, it's locked in this sick dichotomy that really certainly doesn't gain the people.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's been needed for a long time. It's just, like I said earlier, it's so ingrained in the American psyche that there's a Simpsons episode I saw many years ago where Homer he's talking to the devil, and he says that he's going to vote for a third party, and the devil says, "Go ahead, throw your vote away." Ha ha ha. I mean, that's kind of how Americans see it. Like voting for a third party is throwing your vote away. So it will require a massive change in the national consciousness, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. So in the meantime, we need people like Trump and Sanders to kind of break the mold, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And I totally agree as well. And since this, I mean, in the beginning of this first, premiere pod, we said we would stick to 1 hour programs. But since this is going really well, and I am really enjoying this discussion, and I'm sure the listeners will as well, I think we should make an exception and keep going for another 30 minutes, which means that we will have another 5-minute music break, and we'll listen to another, believe it or not, another song by Winglord. Welcome back, everyone. You just listened to Winglord building the ships, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as everyone else here did. It's a beautiful song. You should get all the albums. They are available on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, everywhere, basically, and also arctus.com, of course. Anyways, let's get back to this super interesting discussion about the American presidential election. And I think we'll start with you, Jonas. You had some questions or something you wanted to bring up.
No, it was actually our American friends who during the pause brought up the Rick Wilson thing, which I wasn't really aware about. But could you please, our American friends, tell us a bit about it? What's been going on?
Well, you can go and watch this online, but Rick Wilson is a strategist for the Republican Party. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was on a call-in show, and somebody called in with a question for him about the alternative right and actually identified himself as a sympathizer with that, which obviously means in the U.S. that would mean radix and countercurrents and possibly Arctos and Right-On as well. And usually we're completely ignored in the mainstream. So the fact that that happened at all, I thought was rather incredible. But Wilson responded by saying that the alternative right was something that was not relevant in the course of history, I think were his words. And he said these are people who sit at home in their parents' basements masturbating to anime. And then he made some other comments about these people having lots of Hitler iconography on their home pages. Am I leaving anything out, Matt?
That's pretty accurate, more or less.
You can see it on YouTube.
And the comedic thing is, as it turns out, Rick Wilson's son is, if not a pimp, runs a website called How to Be a Pimp, in which he purports to teach guys how to turn bitches out and keep them in check.
Sounds very wholesome and conservative.
Yeah, Rick Wilson family values right there.
Yeah.
But it's just really fascinating to me that the alternative right actually, I mean, it's a very minor thing. I don't want to make it out to be more than it is, but the fact that it got mentioned by somebody from one of the two big parties at all is rather incredible. And of course, that's because of Donald Trump, who's been getting a lot of support from the alternative right and has refused to denounce it, even though the media has tried to get him to do so. I mean, they always tell him, oh, what do you think about the fact that you've got all these white supremacists supporting you? And I think his response was just something like, well, a lot of people like me. So he hasn't taken the opportunity to denounce the alt-right like he could. And I think a week or two ago, he even retweeted something that came from, it wasn't somebody I was familiar with, but somebody traveled in the alt-right milieu.
Oh, but he's done that numerous times. And his response to the criticism is, of course, the only proper response you can get. I mean, and it's totally in line with the Trump attitude and the Trump strategy to never apologize to the hostile media, the hostile liberal media. Because why would he? I mean, of course, he should welcome all support. And deep down, I truly believe that he sympathizes to a large extent with the alt-right. Or what do you think, Matt?
Well, this is probably, from a sheer political standpoint, this is probably the wisest move he can make, because you notice that most Republicans, when they're called on these sort of things, like, why you got so many white supremacists supporting you, or you said something racist, they'll start apologizing, they'll start groveling to the media, they'll start groveling for forgiveness. And the problem with that is, number one, you're throwing your supporters under the bus, and number two, the media is never going to forgive you. They're always going to oppose you because they're leftists. It's sort of like the cargo cult thinking that drove John McCain's campaign in 2008. Because prior to that election, he was constantly praised by the leftist media because he was a quote-unquote maverick who was willing to stand up to President Bush and the evil conservative cabal running the Republican Party. He was the Democrats' favorite Republican. So the logic was that if he got the nomination, he'd be able to break into the leftist support. But what happened was, when he got the nomination, they all closed ranks and supported Obama and called McCain an evil right-wing racist. So Trump sees that, and he realizes that groveling to these people is just going to hurt his campaign, so he doesn't do it. That's never apologize. It's sort of like what in Vox Day discussed in his book, SJWs Always Lie. If you get attacked by SJWs, you don't apologize, because then they'll just sniff blood and go in for the kill.
And curiously enough, that's also exactly what I write in my book, even though I didn't read Vox Day's book before. So apparently we well, as they say, great minds think alike, obviously. but it's perfectly logical, actually. I mean, you should, of course, never apologize or show weakness to your enemy. I mean, because that is what they are. And it's very nice to see that more and more people are realizing this, especially Donald Trump. He's not a stupid person. I mean, a lot of people think that he is simple and stupid because he speaks in a language which ordinary people can understand, and many people make the stupid mistake of interpreting that as him being a simpleton or something. But in fact, he's a genius. I mean, he knows.
Come on, Daniel.
He knows communication. He has great communication skills. He's by far the best debater in this whole primary election.
That could be the case, but he's no genius. I mean, let's be.
I think he is. Yeah, I believe he is. But yeah. I'm quite curious. But on a scale of 1 through 10, Jonas, how much do you like Bernie Sanders?
It's a difficult question, and the thing is, I'm looking at it perhaps from sort of a different perspective.
What do you see as his most important qualities? Is it his religious background, or is it something else?
No, I would say, his religious, political background, ethnical, what have you. I would rate him at a 2 at the most. So it's not that, but I think given his sort of way of acting in public office and what have you, I think he's probably the sort of the safest one, because the American presidential office is kind of we've seen a lot of disasters there the last couple of years.
Of course.
And I'm not sure if my, if my American co-hosts agree with me on that one, but I think they do.
I think John would probably agree with you, although I think John would rate him closer to 10, maybe 8. What do you say, John?
I don't want to put it in terms of numbers. I mean, you have to keep in mind that, I mean, American politics has been so far gone for so long that, I mean, the fact that people like Trump and Sanders have emerged at all. I mean, something I was telling a friend the other day was I would love it if Prince Metternich or somebody like him were to be reincarnated and, run for political office in the U.S., but obviously that's impossible. And second of all, I mean, even if he could, nobody would vote for him. Under the circumstances of America today, people like Trump and Sanders, the fact that they've even gotten as far as they have is rather incredible. So it's whatever you think of them personally, politically, whatever. I mean, I don't see how you can argue from our perspective on the true right, the alt-right, whatever you want to call it, that they're the least bad options.
No.
John,
just so you know, there's a lot of echo on your line. I don't know if it means something, but
I wasn't sure what to do about it, though. I mean, it wasn't happening before.
No, it's actually better.
No, it's probably Daniel and the Trump camp.
Well, was it still? Could it still be heard, or should I repeat it, or what?
No, please don't repeat anything of what you said.
Because it's anti-Trump.
But no, it was perfectly audible. So
okay.
No need to repeat anything. Back.
No, but I mean the thing is, these guys are they are more authentic than the most of the other candidates and etc. So where do we go from there? I think Trump would be a more, as I said just recently, a more sort of volatile candidate.
But you would still vote for him, right? If you had the opportunity.
I'm not sure. If I would have been American and there would have been a lot of other sort of considerations that have, would have come into it.
But if you had to choose between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, who would you vote for, Jonas?
I can't say that because
it's so embarrassing to admit.
No, because my main sort of consideration is sort of American foreign policy. And what they've done to screw up the world, and how they've let themselves become a vehicle for the Zionist mafia to fuck up the world, if you will. Excuse my language.
I would definitely say that Trump is more
reliable.
Reliable, absolutely. He's not a volatile candidate. I mean, he used that as a strategy during his early campaign to kind of stir up emotions. But if you watch the later debates, he seems like a more and more stable and solid candidate in each debate.
By God, I hope you're right.
He has had some troubling things about Iran, which I didn't really like. I mean, he was sounding a little bit like McCain or something there for a little while on Iran.
I think it's pretty harmless. I mean, he basically criticized the deal they made and so forth. But let's hear it from Matt. I mean, Matt is the expert. He's actually living in the U.S. He visited lots of these meetings and he's done a lot of on-the-ground reporting. So let's talk to the expert here.
I think Trump, what personally got me interested in Trump and what I think makes him by far the most valuable candidate to become president is not even economics or the war issue. I think it's the demography issue. Trump got attention and leapt to the front of the Republican field because he took the most conservative position on immigration. We need to build a border wall, and we need to get illegal aliens out. And this is more significant than it sounds, because before he entered the race, the Republicans had more or less conceded that amnesty was going to happen. Or as they're calling it now, comprehensive immigration reform was going to happen. Their chosen frontrunner for the GOP nomination was Jeb Bush, a man who called illegal immigration an act of love, who happens to be married to a extremely squat, unattractive Mexican woman. I'm trying to be polite here. Maybe it was true love. A man who speaks Spanish at home. A man who, if you want to use the conservative appellation, it's a free. It was made for Jeb Bush, Then Trump comes in. Suddenly, he's at the top of the polls. Suddenly, politicians are talking about punishing sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are, for example, Chicago, San Francisco, where the police deliberately allow illegal aliens to settle and don't ask for their immigration status. We're talking about, obviously, building a border wall. We're talking about demographics and the fact that white Americans may become a minority in their own country if this course is not averted. So for me, that's by far the most important issue. And as we were talking about the earlier,
seriously,
and it should be for all Europeans as well, because what happens in the US has large repercussions in Europe as well. I mean, most of Europe, especially Western Europe, which to which Sweden definitely belongs, has been basically under a U.S. cultural occupation since the end of the Second World War, and everything that happens in the U.S. always kind of reflects on the political debate and the political climate in Europe. So I think apart from the demographic issue in the U.S., which I of course view as extremely important as well, everything he's done so far and everything he's done so far in his campaign, I mean, he's basically trashed political correctness from the start. He has kind of how do you put it? Shifted the Overton window.
Yes, he's moved it to the right considerably, and he's and to a certain extent, he's made given white Americans the courage to stand up for their own political interests. Like, this is something I wrote about for Right On. The GOP and the conservatives in America has really been afflicted by tokenism. You see a lot of non-whites being pushed to the front of the Republican Party just because they happen to be non-white. You saw Herman Cain run for the presidency in 2012. You see minor black Republican politicians like Mia Love and Tim Scott given disproportionate importance. You have Ben Carson in this race, and I'm not disparaging any of these people. I happen to like Ben Carson on a personal level. He is an immensely gifted and talented surgeon and intelligent man. But the thing is, because of demographic changes and because of the Democrats' open war on white America, the Republicans have to be a party of white America. There is no choice. And if the Republicans don't start standing up for white Americans' interests, the country is basically lost. As we talked about in the previous segment, the changing demographics will make it all but impossible for the Republican Party in its current state to win national elections in as soon as 4 or 8 years from now. Trump, if nothing else, even if he doesn't win, he's helped open up the dialogue and has actually encouraged other Republican politicians to be more naked in their advocacy for conservative values. Whereas before, everyone was just trying to sort of tack to the center and be like Jeb Bush.
No, I agree on that, Matt. But do you really think that Trump is the guy to do that? Do you really not think that he's kind of disingenuous?
He could be disingenuous. He could be like I'm not like I'm not worshiping him as the great savior of America, but as far as I can tell, he's by far the candidate who's least likely to screw us over. Cruz, Rubio, Bush, etc., are in the pocket of Wall Street, in the pocket of super PACs, and have shown that they will say or do anything to they lie to the voters and they serve their true masters, which is big money in corporate America. Trump exists to a certain extent outside of that continuum, and it's entirely possible if he gets into office he will completely renege on everything he said. But at the moment, he looks like the candidate who's least likely to do that. I characterize him, as
I think
maybe not the best option, but he's the least worst option.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
And also, what I said during the debate between me and Jonas in this Swedish podcast.
And I agree.
2 months ago. Yeah, and I know, and yeah, you basically agreed with me on everything towards the end of the debate, which was very big of you. But anyways, that's a fact, and I agree with Matt. I don't view him as a savior, and I don't view any European anti-immigration party as the sole saviors of like European or Western civilization, but
of anything, and I mean that goes for America as well. I mean, you really have to rise up.
Exactly, and we have to start being more pragmatic, and we have to. I mean, at least it's a step in the right direction, and then we can take another step and another step after that.
Well, the one thing, I mean, I said this before, but I'll just reiterate. I mean, even if Trump reneges on what he says, he gets the nomination but doesn't get the presidency or whatever, his victory in the primary process in itself would destroy the Republican establishment, and that alone, makes it a good thing. Also, I think the fact that this was supposed to be the election where the Republicans were going to start doing this outreach to minorities. I mean, they started talking about it as soon as Romney was defeated. They were going to try to work on ways to appeal to blacks and Hispanics. He completely ruined that. I mean, he completely changed the agenda. So regardless of what he really is or believes or whatever, I mean, he's definitely done us a great service.
And the funny thing is, by standing up for white Americans' interests, he has already won the votes of the Latinos and the blacks and the women. I mean, he's by far the most popular candidate in all of those demographic segments, according to all reliable polls. Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen those, but
no, but
I really
don't know. I can show them to you. They exist. Matt, back me up on this.
Yeah. That was pretty much borne out in the New Hampshire polls, where Trump basically won every single demographic group, including racial group. I mean, New Hampshire's an outlier because it's a largely white state, but polls would estimate that Trump has more Latino support than the other Republican candidates, which is funny considering that the other two major candidates, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, are themselves Latino. He has more black support. He has more Asian support. His support cuts across every demographic group. At least when it comes to the Republican primaries. When it comes to the general election, things are going to be more muddled.
Let me ask you there. Does Cruz come across as a Latino? Obviously he is, but it puzzles me to some extent.
Sort of, and yes and no, which is sort of because of his own mixed heritage. His father was Latino, his mother was a white American.
Sure.
So he doesn't really he doesn't play that angle up as much as Rubio does. Rubio is the son of Cuban immigrants, so Rubio is more blatantly Latino. It's actually kind of an amusing moment in the CBS GOP debate last night. Rubio accused Cruz of not being able to speak Spanish, and Cruz actually replied to him in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was highly entertaining. And
why is it entertaining? It's a pertinent question. Does he come across as a Latino?
He doesn't really come across as much. He sort of plays it up in departments, but he tries to portray himself as a regular white evangelical American.
Well, this is it. I mean, he doesn't sort of appeal to the sort of Latino segment of American society. That's my point.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because Trump already won that segment. But anyways, I think we should maybe start to wrap this up. One question that remains to be answered. John, your support for Bernie Sanders on a scale from 1 through 10.
You're really obsessed with this, Daniel. I don't know, 3?
3, okay.
But I mean, for any other, like Hillary, it's 0. So
and Trump?
Well, Trump, you mean support? Well, I mean, I'm not going to go and canvass for any of these people. What do you mean by support?
Just give me a number, 1 through 10.
Compared to any other Republican, for Trump, 10, absolutely. I mean, there's no comparison between him and anybody else.
Excellent. That's everything I wanted to hear. So anyways, Matt, I know you want to say something about, I mean, you have a lot of books out and you have an excellent website with lots of readers and lots of interesting stuff. would you mind giving us the website address for our listeners?
Yes. My main blog is at mattforney.com. I usually update it daily with a new article or something or other. As for my books, you can find them at mattforneybooks.com. I have them in both ebook and paperback formats, and you can also find them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and any other book retailer you can think of. I'm also on YouTube at youtube.com/user/realmattforney. In fact, I posted when I was in Iowa recovering the caucuses for Right On. That's where I posted all of the videos I got of candidates speaking, as well as daily video logs. And at the moment, I'm on Twitter too, at twitter.com/basedmattforney, though don't know how much longer that'll last with my previous account getting banned. So that's where you can check me out if you want to see any more of my writing. Oh, and I also have a weekly podcast. You can find that at SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/MattForney Show.
Excellent. And you're also a very, very popular writer at the famous Manosphere website, Return of Kings.
I'm also a frequent contributor to Return of Kings. You can read my stuff there at returnofkings.com.
And Jonas, have you done anything of value you want to promote?
It's almost insulting.
It's a funny question, yeah. I've got a publishing house being around. That's called Reconquista Press. And the web address is reconquistapress.com. So, yeah.
Are you publishing things in English?
Yeah, I'll send you a book.
Okay.
John.
Well, we can talk about this privately. But.
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the introduction, you're also a very popular personality within the Swedish alt-right, and especially in the probably the biggest Swedish podcast, Motgift, which means antidote in English.
I think it is the biggest one. Definitely.
Yeah, by far.
Yeah.
It's my assumption. So, any Swedes listening, I'm sure you've already heard about Motgift, but still, check it out. Jonas is there, and I'm actually also participating quite often.
Yeah, and
it's two reasons to start listening to it, I guess.
And it's ridiculous to sort of start bragging, but I've been on some American shows as well, like the American Cesspool 3 times, and etc. So, yeah.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of Right On Radio. Stay tuned for the next episode. Good evening.